Welcome back, everybody, to What a Concept, a fun podcast that I've been doing with a lot of my friends here on YouTube, where we do a deep dive into some of our favorite concept records. And today on the show, we have Brent from Similitude of Prague. Welcome, Brent.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Oh, very happy to have you. So, as you can tell by not only the thumbnail but the title, we are diving into one of my favorite Pink Floyd records. And it's the guest that is the one that is the picker. So, Brent, why did we pick Animals from Pink Floyd to talk about today?
Well, I picked Animals because it's my all-time favorite album,
Ooh,
and
okay.
I don't know why that is, why something else hasn't come in its place, but it's just something that just seems no.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's such a fun, well, I shouldn't say such a fun album because I don't know if it's a fun album, but it definitely
Yeah,
has a lot of the staples of like what it is that brings me to music, you know?
exactly.
So yeah, let's dive in. Let's talk about it. Dive in a little deeper into why you chose it. This album has a pretty big legacy. There's a lot of myth and legend around this record. But how would you put this in like the significance of the band slash artist's career and discography? I always picture this as a Pink Floyd slash Roger Water record, rather than like a Big P Pink Floyd record. So what do you think like the big significance of this record is in terms of both Roger Waters and Pink Floyd's discography and career?
Out of the four big ones, obviously Dark
Yeah.
Side, Wish You Were Here on the Wall. This is the one that gets talked about the least.
Yeah.
And those other three are great albums, but I also agree that this is kind of the downfall, the beginning of Waters' departure from Pink Floyd. There were such things as when they were recording that he erased a guitar solo that ended up putting Pigs on the Wing 1 and 2 together. He split that song in half. He got 5 songwriting credits on that album. And in the UK, you get paid on how many royalties and how many songs you write. So he had
Mm,
5 and Gilmore only had 1
right,
to
right, right,
co-write
right.
songs. So that I think really started
Yeah. I would agree. Like this is it, like I think this is where you find Roger Waters' hand on the steering wheel the strongest and would continue for the next two records of The Wall and the Final Cut. Um and it's a shame. Like it also holds some of my favorite music from Pink Floyd, but it's because of the collaboration of all the musicians. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the music section of that because I don't want to get too far ahead of us. But I think you're right. I think this is also where like the biggest animosity between band members start. This is where that
definitely.
tension begins. And I think that has to do a lot with the actual concept of this record as well, because this concept, is all about that conflict and that strife. So to you, what do you think is like the biggest concept? Because this is like the first non-narrative concept record that we're
Yeah.
looking at. All the other records that we've looked at so far are very narrative. It follows a story, it follows a character as it goes through these challenges and tribulations. This is the first one that's much more thematic in terms of its themes. So to you, what's the concept of this record? What's the concept?
Well, obviously, it's somewhat based on George Orwell's Animal Farm, but to a point, not really.
Yeah.
This deals a lot more with capital than anything in that book, per se. And I like
Yeah.
the way it divides the human race into three specific animal groups.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Like it uses the metaphor of animals, like human nature as animals, in the same way that George Orwell,
Yes.
the Animal Farm does. And I think it was either Plato or Aristotle that said that, and like humans are just political animals. And for me, that's kind of the crux of this album, and it kind of showcases that strife and that battle within three different contexts and three different areas within life. You have the capitalistic dogs, those captains of industry, the owners of the factories. You've got the politician pigs, those who run the government. And then you have the sheep that follow along aimlessly, the working class, the individuals that are kind of powerless, the ones who don't have, the means of production or the power within the state, but because of the sheer number of them, they really are the ones that hold the most amount of power if they want to seize it.
Yeah.
Um,
And at the end, if they kind of overpower the dogs.
Absolutely, and That's the big metaphor. You have to be careful because that's the big difference between the sheep and the pigs, right? Like the pigs want power for themselves to maintain power. Sheep
Yeah,
want power to stop being oppressed. The sheep want power to stop the dogs from nipping at their heels and slaughtering them. Do you think there's any kind of underlying significant themes that are going on here, or is it just kind of like some are pigs, some are dogs, and some are sheep?
pretty much. I mean, pigs, three different ones is about three different people, but other than that, it's I think just what dogs are and what sheep are and what different pigs are out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
was I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and we were saying, Roger Waters really doesn't do subtlety. He really, he doesn't really do allegory and metaphor outside of just what's blank on. He really tells you how it is, right? Like he doesn't beat around the bush.
no, he doesn't.
Yeah. With that, we can talk about some of the music here as well,
Sure.
and how like the music kind of reinforces the concept. And I also like this is where I really connect with this record. I've always kind of been a music first, lyrics second kind of a listener. Like I was introduced to this album back in high school and I just liked it because of the music. I thought it was super chill, but also very like engaging and like nothing else I had heard before from Pink Floyd. Like I had, you know, devoured Dark Side of the Moon. I absolutely adored Adam Heart Mother, but this was like so dark and brooding.
Yeah, it's not a fun album.
No, I remember like a local radio station said this isn't the kind of album that you would put at a family barbecue. You wouldn't slap on animals to listen to while you're in the backyard, having some burgers and hot dogs.
You might.
I definitely, and in fact, the next family gathering that we did, I put it on because I remember that. So yeah, how do you? I guess a good question that I have for all of our guests is, how do you think like the music reinforces the theme or the concept of this record?
Well, I want to go back to that point you made earlier about the band kind of at heads with each other and the tension. I
Yeah,
think this album really grew from that. And if you're listening to it on headphones, you can feel that tension.
yeah,
And I think that's probably why I like it so much is because when I listen to music, it's got to be emotion.
hmm.
That's what I look for in music.
I think this is kind of like the last album where more than just Roger had his hands on the wheel. Roger still was the driving force of this, but you can still feel a little bit within Rick's emotion and atmosphere at the keyboards, especially on Pig's Three Different Kinds. That big synth sound, the big like, running his hand across the keyboard as it's going down. Even on Dogs with David Gilmour's guitar works, like that immediacy within his playing style, that very bluesy aspect that he loves to command on there. Each of the individuals had something to bring to the table for this record. Even if Roger was the one that was like, hey guys, I have this concept and I want you to help fill it out. It wasn't like he came with the wall and it's like, okay, it's done. Now I just need you to play it. Right. Like it was like, I want you to come to the table and help flush out this idea that I've had. Um,
Yeah, it has more of a universal feel for sure. Um,
yeah.
Rick and David, I think, owe a lot to this album. I don't think it would
Hmm.
have been an album without those two.
I agree.
Like their trademark is all over it.
I think this was the last time we actually heard both of them play so passionately on an album, probably until Division Bell. Because I think like Momentary Lapse of Reason was them trying to relearn how to play Pink Floyd
Yeah.
records. And I still love Momentary Lapse of Reason, but I think it was Division Bell that they're like, oh, this is a Pink Floyd record.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
I love that both of those albums, Animals and Division Bell, have that kind of like at the end of the day, it's the unification. It's that concept of keep talking, keep engaging with one another. And I think you see kind of like the yin and the yang. Animals is the yang when communication breaks down, when people take advantage of one another and abuse their power. And Division Bell is much more of a maintain the connections, maintain those relationships, make sure that you're at the table and you're talking with one another. And you kind of feel that with the music as well and how everybody's playing because when that communication breaks down and there's a vying for power, then you get albums like The Wall and the Final Cut. But when you all come together and play as a group, that's where you get Division Bell and The Endless River.
Totally. And
So,
do you think there's any digs at Roger Waters on the Division Bell?
um, at least with David Gilmour and with Richard, like they're a little bit more subtle. So I think there
Oh yeah.
might be, I
Oh,
think
me
there
too.
definitely is, but I think it's less in your face than
Interesting.
Roger.
That's
Yeah,
another conversation for another day.
definitely, definitely, definitely. Um, so yeah, I love the music. I love David Gilmour's playing on this. I love all of his guitar works, especially on Dogs. Um, Richard's playing on both Sheep and Pigs is just outstanding. As much as I'm not a big, huge fanboy of Roger Waters, it really does go to show his genius within constructing songs and, orchestrating a concept and an idea. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Give him credit. He is a hell of a songwriter. I'll give him that. Like,
absolutely.
he's a very smart man that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll never be the one to say that, Roger Waters isn't an artist. He is absolutely one of the best artists working. His
Yeah.
taste might not necessarily be mine, but I can at least respect him for the art that he's producing.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
so now we come to, I always find this is one of the harder topics to kind of talk about, which is any negatives about this album. Is there anything we don't like about it? Anything that doesn't quite work? Is the concept too heavy-handed? Does it get lost in the sauce? In your mind, is there anything that you don't particularly enjoy about this album? I know this is going to be kind of hard for you because you just said this is your favorite album of all time. So,
The only small thing I might mention was that the quality dips just a slight bit with Sheep. But other than that, it's a complete masterpiece in my mind.
yeah, it's so interesting because I find when I first listened to this record, Sheep was my favorite track just because of the big crescendo at the end. The big build up and that amazing Gilmore, guitar lick at the end. It's hard for me to find faults for this record, like I kind of have to actively look for it. And even all the faults that I do end up finding, I always think, well, I wouldn't change it because of that. Like the only thing I can think of is like Dogs might be a little too long, a little too long, like overblown and long-winded. Because when they were playing this live before the record came out, and I think it was still called "You've Got to Be Crazy." I kind of like it better when it's shorter, like in and around the 12-minute mark.
Yeah,
But I still love that play out, that big buildup that we have in the mid section. It makes the ending of the album, like the ending of that track, so much more powerful.
yeah,
It really hits
definitely.
home. So even my criticism of like Dogs being a little too long, I can't think of it being any shorter, like it would undercut the big crescendo at the end where he's being dragged down by the stone. And the only other thing I can think of is like maybe the concept might be a little too like over I don't know, overdone or overblown. But again, like I really have to look to find faults for this record.
Yeah.
We can move now into my favorite part of the show, which is the platinum album test. This is where I've got 5 questions that we'll discuss, and it's either a pass or a fail. This will see how many of these 5 questions we can pass. If it doesn't pass any, then it's a trash record. If it passes one, then it's a tin. If it passes two, then it's a bronze. Three is silver, four is gold, and 5 out of 5 is a platinum record. Let's talk about this. Let's see if we can get it as a platinum record. And the questions will get progressively harder to see if it can pass. Question number one is the concept an original concept?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Um, the capitalism part of it has been done to a lot of people. Protest songs have all done that. But the concept of dividing humans into those three categories, I think, is unique to this album, as far as I know.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree in that, like, yeah, this is going to be a hard one to see if it can pass. And I think this is where we're going to talk because I agree. Protest songs, and even protest albums, albums about capitalism, they were done to death by the time this came out, right? Late 70s. They raged against the machine for years and years and years. Um, I also think like the concept of, the allegory of man as animals and subdividing people into different kind of animals. I know that was done in literature, obviously, the biggest one being Animal Farm, but you get that also with Watership Down. You get that with almost any anthropomorphic tale. They're usually more towards like kids. Like, I don't know if the actual concept itself is original, but I think what they do with it is original. With that on the table, would you say that this passes the original concept test?
I would say yes, it does that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think doing this in a very new way, both as raging against capitalism and putting it towards, as animals in an animalistic system, I think we can give that one a pass. So I'll
Yeah.
say I'll say that's a pass. I'll say that's a pass. That's one for one. The second one, does the music reinforce the themes of the concept?
Again, I would say yes. I think the tension which we spoke about earlier really helps these themes kind of come to life.
Hmm.
And especially in dogs, you can really hear the tension in some of those middle parts where it's just, spacey sound effects and the dogs barking in the background. And it really feels isolated and cold. And that's maybe how the dogs feel deep
Hmm.
down.
Yeah, I agree. I think each of the different animals on here really does have that unit, like that sound, like dogs is much more subtle, and that's kind of how you have to be within more of like the corporate capitalistic side of things, right? Like the businessman, right? You
Yeah.
want you, what is it? Work on your handshake so that when they turn the backs on you, you can stab them in the back. So yeah, you need something a little bit more subtle. And then for pigs, being like the politicians, it's very flashy. It's very immediate. It's very like, ooh, look at me as
Yeah.
I'm taking away your rights and freedoms. Um, and then the
In an
sheep,
upbeat way.
exactly, in a very
Yeah.
upbeat way, in a very catchy way. It's very immediate, right? And with sheep, I feel as if, it starts off very subtle, very somber, and very moody, and then slowly and gradually coming into its own power to finally rise up. So I think this one will probably be the easiest pass on the five.
I'll
I
also
absolutely. Mhm.
I'll also say with sheep, after that, pastoral beginning, it gets into a real, I don't know what to say, like a confusion and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
tension and angst and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it kind of starts getting
Yeah.
crazy, for lack of better words,
Yeah. Yeah. Like this, not delusional, but like this, like,
uncomfortable,
yeah, there's like this uncertainty, but also like tension and this like, oh gosh, what are we doing?
something
Um,
in the air, kind of a,
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Um, so I think absolutely that's a pass. That's two for two. This one, I think will have some. This was going to be the hardest hurdle for me for it to pass. And that is it accessible to the casual listener? Can someone off the street sit down and listen to it?
well, as a Pink Floyd fan, I would say no.
Yeah.
Start with Dark Side or Wish You Were Here. And as a
Yeah.
casual listener, it's not a happy album and there's nothing you can really sing along with. And it is uncomfortable taste of reality. So I think that
Yeah.
would turn people off too.
Yeah. This is the only one, like this question here is the only one that I think it's going to struggle with because there is a little bit of a reason why out of, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here on the Wall, this one doesn't get talked a lot as much. This is like once you've digested those more accessible albums, you come to appreciate this one. This is like the black espresso of albums where after you've, had your double double, after you've had your mocha, once you've had those more accessible drinks and you've acquired the taste for coffee, you learn to appreciate an espresso, but you're not just going to sit down and enjoy an espresso right off the get-go. I feel like this is the definition of an acquired taste. And once you acquire it, it rewards you over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even that the cover of the album too just speaks of the same things. That
Hmm.
kind of industrial feeling and
Yeah.
very isolated and cold.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, this is like the perfect kind of album where like music nerds, like those who love music, love all the facets of music, love this record.
Oh yeah.
But my mom, who only listens to like the Bee Gees and Celine Dion, she's not going to sit down and listen to this record. you know,
No,
she'll at least sit down and listen to Dark Side of the Moon, but she won't sit down and listen to Animals. You know?
no. Oh, my wife has the same issue. She's like, "Oh, do you
Yeah.
have to listen to that one? Put on Wish You Were Here. At least it's
Yeah.
happier." And I'm like, "Well, no, it's not really that much happier, but it is."
Not really that much happier when you think about it. So yeah, I think this one is a fail. I think this one's a fail. I think that puts it 2-3. From here, though, I think we've got a clean finish. The fourth question is the music solid from start to finish? Are there any dips in quality or duds in the track list?
Nothing that I think any music fan would have. Like I had mentioned earlier, Sheep for me is maybe the only little, I
Hmm.
wouldn't even call it a dud.
Yeah.
Honest, it
And
just, yeah,
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like you might have sections of this album that maybe dip a little bit, but like the overall song, like there's only four tracks on this record, and like each one makes up for its own, I wouldn't even call them shortcomings, but like whatever
yeah.
dip they have. Like I mentioned that part in Dogs, so I'm like, oh, that kind of meanders for a little bit too long. But like it makes sense that, it builds itself up. It becomes something bigger.
Yeah, it has a
So,
purpose, that for sure.
mhm. Yeah, and unlike all the other albums that I've talked about on this show that have like a run length of like 2 hours with like 14 to 20 songs on it, this is the one that like I wouldn't change any of these songs. I wouldn't remove any of these songs to do anything with. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
neither would
think
I.
for me this is an easy pass. I think this one more than any other Pink Floyd album is outside of, you know, Annam Heart Mother, which is my absolute favorite, um, has the strongest start to finish runtime.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So I
Not
think
much else that you can really beat it with.
that's right. So yeah, that's an easy pass for me. So that's 3 for 4. So now we're on to the final question. Is this album the perfect length? Is it too long or too short?
It's definitely the right length
Yeah.
because I find 40 to 50 minutes is the sweet spot. And after that, you start kind of drifting off and your mind starts going elsewhere. But albums can be short, too short as well.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's for the same reason is not always a good thing either.
Yeah. In my mind, I think this is the perfect length for the album that we have. I think if we were to go any longer, it would be too dour, it would be too depressing, and it would run into a lot of the shortfalls that I found with The Wall, where it got too lost in the sauce, too mucked up in the weeds, um, and it's here for just the right amount of time. So it's definitely like the perfect length in terms of I wouldn't want it any longer. Um,
Well, if it was any longer, you're going to start getting into repeating themes, and
exactly.
I think that would take a lot away from it.
Exactly.
If
Yeah.
that's, one of these things I would say today that I find that kind of drives me nuts is you could shorten down an album just by getting some of those reoccurring themes. You don't
Hmm.
need to slow it and call it a reprieve. The same song. I'm not
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
give it examples, but
Yeah. I was gonna say we don't need they call it like the supper's ready treatment, right? We don't need the reprisal of the original theme slowed down and more epic, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a soft spot for that. I love it every time that I hear it, but it could also be overused, right? We don't need to do it every
yeah,
single time. Yeah.
exactly. When it's used correctly, it works fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think this album is too long or too short. I think that this is the perfect length for what they are trying to do for this record. So
Agree.
yeah, so that is 4 out of 5. We have another gold album on our hands. I think this is as close to a platinum album as I've gotten to so far. And even that whole is accessible to the casual listener, you know, it's still true, but I don't see that as a negative, So this is as close to a platinum record as I think we've gotten out of all the records we've looked at so far. So another
That might be a
gold-plated
pretty hard
record.
thing to obtain.
Yeah, especially when we're dealing with concept records, which is part of the reason why I put that there. That's the make or break one. that brings us to the final. I mean, I always like to ask if this album you would consider a masterpiece, and I absolutely do. And I know you had mentioned that you absolutely do as well.
Definitely.
Definitely. Yeah, that brings us to the end. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring to the table when talking about animals? Anything we didn't cover?
Yeah, there's one more thing. The instrumentation parts in this album have a chance to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
You put so much other things in that space that it doesn't breathe and it sounds really cluttered. This album,
Yeah.
you can sit and you can hear everything perfectly.
Yeah.
The overlapping stuff is fine. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It seems just to have enough nice space.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree because like not only does it give it its space in the mixing, it also gives it the space time-wise. You know,
yep,
it's not like we're just jumping from one passage to another passage to another passage. There's a little bit of a breathing, buffer between the instrumental passages and the lyrics. And it's not cluttered with all this extra padding that's going on around it.
exactly.
So I fully agree. And I really hope, and that's part of the reason why I like bands like Espacho and FMA that they provide that space for it. They really allow that space to grow, and I think that is a perfect balance of Roger Waters and David Gilmour working very well together, where both are giving the music the respect that it deserves.
Yeah,
A great piece to end on this episode, though. So thank you, Brent, for
yeah.
coming on talking about Animals, one of my favorite records. I'm so glad you picked this one. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh, I enjoyed it very much.
Amazing. Anything you want to leave the watcher with? Anything you want to promote or tell the audience?
No, not really. Just check out the Similitude of Prague YouTube channel. And when I'm not busy, I try to get stuff up there. But yeah, it sometimes has slow times. But
Yeah, I feel
other than
that.
that,
So,
no, it's
mhm,
I love talking about music, no matter if it's like this or just online. It's great.
absolutely. And I love chatting with you about this kind of stuff. Always happy to have you on. Uh,
Right
I've left
on.
I've left Brent's information down below. You can go and follow. I always love seeing his take on music, and I always love chatting with him about music. So
Perfect.
amazing. And thank you all for watching. I still need to figure out a proper send off for this. So, I always ask, like, I'm trying to figure out like a good way to end this. Um, haven't quite figured it out yet. It's always this awkward pause, but thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. We'll see everybody
Good
later.
night, everybody. Thanks.